This is a screenshot taken on December 23rd, 2010, nearly 6 years ago. It's the first house that I ever made in Minecraft. It's amazing to see how far I've come. Who would have known that in 6 years' time I'd be selling plushies of my own head? Buy my merch. But you can't really tell what the build looked like just from this screenshot. Fortunately, I remember exactly what it looked like, and I'm going to remake this in beta 1.1. However, that was Minecraft before creative, before a lot of things. So I had to actually go through survival. I had to kill pigs, I had to chop trees, I had to go mining, and most of all, I had to die a lot. I got exploded by creepers, which, by the way, made absolutely no sound. Honestly, you guys should play the beta version of Minecraft. It is a completely different game to what we're used to now. If only just for the experience. It's actually quite a lot of fun. So anyway, I made my house, and I'll give you a little tour around it before I remake this exact house, but in the way I would do it today. This building, I remember distinctly, was supposed to be just a workshop, but it ended up being my actual living quarters. I had a farm over here, and then the other building was meant to be a lighthouse. Because I died so often, I needed to find where my base was. There was coordinates, but I don't think I knew that at the time, so having a big lighthouse was a really big help. But I would make this way differently, so let's go into that. I needed to find an area that was very suitable, but kind of matched what I had back then. The terrain is so much different now, it was very hard to find an area, but this will do in a pinch. I think this roughly equates to what I was after. It certainly got the water around it, which is one of the main features. So I started off by remaking the little dock that I had. In the original photo, it was actually a bridge, but this will do for this one. And you'll notice that I've immediately gone for the spruce instead of the oak as my first choice. You're going to notice a lot of the things that I've been teaching you on this channel shine through in this video. Now, I wanted to keep the character of my original build, but I couldn't improve it without moving away from that very box-like shape. Everything was mega square, even the fence around it. So I'm going to try and keep that rectangular shape for the buildings, but at the same time, I want to give it a little more curvature and a bit more shape. And counting the blocks on my original screenshot, I tried to make everything I built exactly the same size and dimensions as the original, although that's pretty difficult because of the angle that the picture was at. You'll notice that I've actually gone for a framework, which is pretty standard for any of my buildings these days, and I didn't do that in the original. It was just a pure and simple box with a roof. And one of the most interesting things about my original build is that my roof wasn't centered. There was one block of the wall that was flat, and it looked so odd. So I've created this overhang on the side of this house to try and match that very weird feature that I'm not entirely sure was intentional. Maybe I just messed up. Either way, it was a defining feature for that original house. You'll see that I'm changing spruce on the roof to be dark oak. That's because I actually made the same mistake I made 6 years ago when I started building this. I made the roof the same color and block as the walls. That means there's no distinguishing the two of them, and having a barrier, even if it's just a darker shade of brown, really helps give the house a bit more character. If you remember back to the original design, there was a layer of slabs that went round the house. Now, the me 6 years ago probably thought that was detail, and I'm not going to do that on this one. However, I will leave a cobblestone foundation on the side where it's slightly lower as a bit of a tribute to that very nice design detail. For the roof, I'm going for something that resembles the original design, but of course I need to add a bit more shape to it. Just having that cone-like roof is very amateurish, so having this intricate entrance with the slabs on top will give it a bit more shape, and we'll come back to the roof as I think it's the last thing that I'm going to add. At the back, I wanted to have something a little bit interesting. This detail didn't exist, so it's just me adding stuff to kind of fill the space. So I added a little bit of a fake blacksmith out here. It's a nice touch, and it's got a cobblestone furnace type thing going on with some very simple window designs accompanying it. I made sure that the windows were different heights because it kind of went with the whole rustic feel that this house has got going on. In the original design, this side was just a blank wall with a door, so I kind of wanted to make that improved. There's a big door now, at least 3 blocks wide, and it's got a bit of detail to it, with a couple of windows each side. On the original, there was just glass thrown in wherever I could put it. Now this is what it looks like when I don't know what I'm doing yet. I fly around and just look at the build for ages until I work it out. I decided to add a bit of a balcony and a side entrance. Remember, I wanted to keep that rectangular shape as a base, and I added those overhangs to try and give it a little extra shape. For the roof, which we're finally getting to now, I decided to go with my favourite block stained clay with a mix of 2 different browns. That gave it an extra layer of contrast with the other blocks that I've got going on. This is a fantastic palette. The dark oak, the spruce, and the stained clays, mixed in with some stone and a bit of grass for decoration. So there's only one thing left to do on this particular build, which is decorate the chimney. We've done this loads of times on the channel because we love rustic houses here, and have some smoke coming out of the chimney in the form of cobwebs. This is pretty much what I imagined it back in the day, but this is all of the techniques that I've learned over the years to be able to transform a rectangular box into what that is now. You have to remember though, most of these blocks didn't exist back then. We're talking 6 years ago, you were lucky to have wood. None of these colours existed, having a palette was incredibly difficult. So we're now going to move on to the second bit, which is the lighthouse. And this posed a lot of problems for me, one of which was I don't want to lose the original feel of my lighthouse that I made 6 years ago. However, lighthouses are circular, so making something square is just a no-go zone for me. I decided to add a big stone plinth to put everything on. That would give the lighthouse a bit of context and some rise, enough to make it stand out amongst my shack. I've still got the overhang which I've planned for with my 2 pillars there, but the actual lighthouse itself I had to make circular. Now back in the day I'm pretty sure I didn't even think of making it circular, I just wanted a lighthouse and I wanted it quickly. But I'm going to try and meet today's standards, but at the same time try and resemble my original concept. So lighthouses in general tend to be this big spire, usually white and red, at least in the UK, and I think snow was a good way to go about it. But I needed to define a few other things before I just went straight up for the tower. Now this is pretty common of me building in a non-tutorial style. This isn't a tutorial, this is me building the way I normally build, all over the place. Like you saw it with the house, I would detail one side of the wall before finishing all the others. It's exactly the same thing here, it's absolutely nonsense, there's no structure to it whatsoever. But it's still fun to watch, I hope. The overhang is something that I decided to detail very early on apparently, and it's not a big deal because I knew exactly what I wanted with it. The house here was a different story. I took a while to work out how I wanted this to go, so I dropped it for a while and went back to the lighthouse, which at least I knew where I was going with it. I needed it to go up fairly tall but also be very cylindrical. I imagine that's why I went for a square design in the first place, because making a cylinder is not easy. To do it, you need to have the centers be taller than the corners, if you want to call them that. You can see that each layer of snow is deliberately placed at a certain Y coordinate. That gives the illusion of a fairly decent cylinder. You'll hopefully see that a bit later on as we circle round. I actually went through a bit of trial and error here. Spruce was definitely not the right block to match with this house. It would have been okay, but I think a more traditional red and white would have been better. As you can see, I went for a traditional cone-shaped roof, which is actually fairly amateur. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with it, it's just we can make a lot better looking roofs by adding some very simple curves. And I hope you agree that once we've added that little arch over the front, it looks a lot better. With a few simple details, that shaped roof looks a lot nicer than the very simple looking cone one. Now the cone one's very effective, but I think adding that little bit of shape is a very good idea in general. So I think that really covered what I wanted with the house, although it lacks detail at the moment. At least I got the shape down. I added a fence around my overhang, much like the original. We've kind of got the house down now, and I need to finish the rest of the lighthouse. But it's got a long way to go in terms of height. It needs to get ever so slightly thinner as it goes up into the sky, fairly tall as you can see. It needs to genuinely tower over everything else so it's nice and visible and serves the original purpose of my lighthouse, which was to be able to find my base. Obviously that's obsolete now. Remember, back in 1.1 beta, there were no beds, there was no respawning. You got put back where you started and you had to walk, whether you liked it or not. The game was incredibly unforgiving. At the top of this lighthouse, I'm going for a more traditional look. It's actually got a platform which you can look around, and it's going to have the little box which actually holds the huge lamp for this lighthouse. But it needs to be incredibly tall. It might look very odd having this much stained glass, but you have to remember from the bottom, the angle's going to make it quite hard to see, so it actually has to be very tall to be able to be as visible at the bottom as it is in the air. So that's kind of where we're at. We're not entirely done, there's a bit more detailing to do, especially in the house and on the lighthouse, but we're generally seeing the shape that I'm going for. I'm going to add a few windows, and I'm actually going to add a bit of quartz staircase. Some of you may be asking, why didn't I make the full thing out of quartz in the first place? That's because I prefer the texture and the shade of white that snow offers, and then having a little bit of quartz in there to make it seem like some of it's gone a bit darker in the weather. I also added some vines on the side, again to make it seem a little more overgrown and weathered. There's a bit of detailing here in the terms of just adding farms and grass and flowers and that sort of thing, and in the original picture there was a tree, so I added one just for the sake of keeping it consistent. But that's it, guys. That is my house, and it's incredibly precious to me because this symbolizes where everything started. Minecraft has become not only my game, but my job. And that's insane. I never thought that a simple house and a lighthouse would lead to the channel that I now have. It's insane. I just wanted to appreciate this build for what it was as a symbol rather as just a build or, you know, remaking what I made a few years ago. This really shows a level of progression. Most of these blocks were not available back in beta 1.1, so any builds that were made back then were probably going to suck because of the lack of options that there were. We've obviously had a huge change in Minecraft over the years, and I think it's generally for the better, although the game has changed. Nostalgia is a wonderful thing. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Goodbye.